Good evening. Welcome to the November 13, 2023 Rental Housing Committee meeting. For those joining us in person, please note that due to our hybrid environment, audio and video recordings can no longer be shared from the lectern, and they can be requested in advance. Additionally, due to our hybrid environment, we don't have speakers line up, so filling out a green card in advance is requested. So the meeting is called to order at 7:02, and first is our roll call. Andrea?
We'll begin with Committee Member Brown.
Yep.
Committee Member Ma.
Present.
Committee Member Cox.
Here.
Vice Chair Rosas is absent. And Chair Keating.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Next is our consent calendar, and it'll be approved in one motion unless any committee member wishes to remove an item. Public comment will occur after discussion if there is any. And would any member of the committee like to pull an item? We have 2 sets of minutes. Okay. And if there are any public comments, I don't see anyone in the audience. And are there any Zoom?
There are no hands on Zoom.
Okay. So can I have a motion to approve the consent calendar? Committee Member Cox.
I move that we approve the consent calendar, the 2 sets of minutes as written.
Second.
Thank you. And we're ready for roll call.
Committee Member Brown.
Yes.
Committee Member Ma.
Aye.
Committee Member Cox.
Yes.
Chair Keating.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay. So we will now move on to oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for people wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. And I'm not seeing any speakers in the audience. Are there any raised hands on Zoom?
There are no hands.
Okay, thank you. So now moving on. Our next item is the CSFRA and MHRSO quarterly financial expenditures report for the fiscal year 2023 to 2024 through September 30th. Public comment will occur after the presentation on the item and committee questions. And I think we're ready for our staff presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair Keating and Rental Housing Committee members. Good evening. This quarterly financial expenditures is upon request of the Rental Housing Committee. After each financial year quarter, we'll present the expenditures to date. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to review the expenditures for both the CSFRA and the MHRSO. Representing 25% of each of the budgets between July and September of 2023. Just as background, on June the 12th, the Rental Housing Committee adopted the financial year 23-24 budgets of both the CSFRA and the MHRSO. These final numbers are slightly higher, and these are the final amounts based on final salaries and benefit calculations. As usual, we report on the key categories: personnel services, non-personnel services, capital outlay, and interfund expenditures. First, we'll cover the CSFRA expenditures. Personnel, 20% of the budgeted amount is expended. This is slightly below the 25% amount due to some personnel costs changed to the Community Development Department budget related to the tenant relocation assistance and various other requested services outside of the CSFRA program, like BMR and affordable housing inquiries. The second category is the non-personnel services. 9% of that budget is expended and 69% encumbered. This is below the 25% expenditure amount, mainly due to be received service provider invoices. And some service providers bill only on a quarterly basis, which means we get their invoices in October, November. The third category is the capital outlay. Per end of September, 10% is expended and a further 4% encumbered. And this is below budget due to the future receipt of deliverables upon completion of the next phases for the database management system. And then the CSFRA interfund expenditures, that will always be charged at the end of December. So at this moment, it is 0% has been spent. So then this is an overview of all the CSFRA expenditures through September 30 as part of the overall budget. As you can see, personnel services 10%, non-personnel services 3.4% of the overall budget, capital outlay 0.4%, and the remaining budget is 86.1%. Then we'll switch to the MHRSO expenditures, which has 3 categories: personnel services, non-personnel services, and interfund expenditures. In the personnel services, 29% is expended. This is slightly over budget due to the work performed and charged by staff to the MHRSO program. If you then compare that to the non-personnel services, for the MHRSO, only 10% has been expended and 72% encumbered. This is below budget due to the invoices still to be received in the following months, but also because staff provided some services otherwise performed by contracted service providers, as you could see in the previous slide, which was slightly higher than budgeted. And the third and last category for the MHRSO is the same as for the CSFRA. Those interfund expenditures will be charged at the end of December. So the total picture of the MHRSO budget is that 13.7% is spent on personnel services and 4.4% on non-personnel services, leaving a remaining budget of 81.9%. This gives a slight overview of the adjusted budgets. That should be 23-24, so we'll correct that mistake. And total revenues are estimated to be sufficient to fund all the expenditures for this year. And we will come back to you every quarter to follow up with the expenditures over the remaining quarters. This is the end of the presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Committee Member Cox.
Just one question. You talked about in an instance where the budget came in lower than expected because staff performed some services that were usually performed by non-staff. I mean, can you, when is it that staff is available to do things like that? And, you know, is it usually the case that it's less expensive for staff to do things than an outside service?
It's not less expensive. It just falls in a different expenditure bucket. We do like to use service providers because we pay them for services, whereas staff is full-time staff that needs to be paid whether or not they perform certain services. So where possible, we like to use outside service providers, but when certain tasks become so all encompassing, like inquiries, telephone, emails. We took that upon ourselves and hired staff to fully man that job because it was a full-time, more than a full-time job to begin with.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Committee Member Ma?
So on the CSFRA personnel services, does this mean we have no vacancies in staff anymore, or do we still have a vacancy in staff positions?
At this point, we have no vacancies. All the positions have been filled.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm just curious on the revenue side. Is it easy to answer the non-registration fees or late fees that we've started collecting? Is that?
So there's two categories of fees that we receive. The first is the annual rental housing fee and the annual rental space fees. Those invoices usually go out in January and have to be paid by February. So the last time this cycle happened was in January of this year for the fiscal year 22-23. So for this fiscal year, those invoices will go out in January of 2024. So late fees were raised with regards to late payment of those annual fees or for late registration, and those fees have been coming in over the years, over the first 6 months of January until June of fiscal year, and they're still kind of dripping in as we speak. Yeah.
Do you have any other questions from committee members? Okay, so now if we have public comment from the audience on our quarterly budget.
Excuse me. Sorry, it looks like there's no hands raised online.
Okay, and no hands raised online.
Correct.
So we're done with public comment on this item. And is there any further discussion on this item? Okay. And I think we don't need to take a vote on this, so I think we're complete. Thank you. So I'd like to bring up two things. I'd like some technical assistance with my screens, and I'm also finding that light very bright. Ah, the light got less. Good. I want to see people. I'm, I think so. Okay, now we will move on to another report, our quarterly activity report for the rent stabilization program. We will first have our presentation and committee questions, and then we'll move to questions from the public.
And Chair, if you want the lights lower, he can lower them more. They're at 40% now.
Lower, please.
Lower. Josh, if you can lower those, please. Is that better?
Better.
Okay, thank you, Josh.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Keating, and good evening, committee members. Item 5.2, excuse me, is a agenda item regarding the quarterly activity report for the first quarter of fiscal year 2023-2024 through September 30th of 2023. And staff would like to note that there have been some data updates, and there will be a revised version of this posted in the final agenda once we're done with the minutes. This is what the overview looks like. The report is updated. You'll see a different report this month than you did at the end of fiscal year 2022-23. The biggest updates and changes are in the eviction prevention section. And as you can see, we now have a whole page for mobile homes, as we have a separate budget for that. So the first chunk that we will report on and look at is our community outreach and education program. And we start off with information requests and inquiries. So far this fiscal year, we've received 742 inquiries from the public. This is an increase of 26% year over year from where we were last year. And right now, the biggest topic receiving inquiries is tenant petitions, followed closely by property registration. And at the end of 2022-23, those were also our top two inquiries. So far, we've held 3 workshops with 40 participants. This does not include the housing and eviction help centers that we've been holding. We've held 12 office hours, and actually this number is actually incorrect, and I will be updating this data. We've had more than 4 participants, and my apologies for the error. We've also held 15 or attended 15 outreach events, and we've reached 626 community members with those events. So this is everything from going to food distribution through Community Services Agency, one of our partners, to attending large events the city or other organizations have posted, including social events like ice cream socials. There have been a few of those this past summer and into the fall, and we've had staff there. We've also been attending walkathons and other events to really reach the community as much as possible. And this is some of our education and outreach materials that we've put out. I want to note that what you see here for targeted mailings, we've sent 2 types of letters to landlords and 3 types of letters to tenants for a total of 1,645 individual mailings. And this next section covers properties. So what we're saying and looking at here are what is happening with the CSA properties. Right now we have 678 properties for a total of approximately 12,700 units that are fully covered, and 12 properties that are partially covered for a total of about 1,676 units. As of September 30th, 84% of our properties were registered for this cycle. So the cycle ends at the end of December, end of November 2023. And we've had 94% of the rental housing fees be paid. This is on par for our typical average. The property registration is significantly increased from where we were last year. And the next section is section 3. We're looking at the rent adjustment petitions that have been received by the city. And you can see here some of the details. So far, we've had quite a few petitions filed. We had 13 petitions through September 30th, and we have quite a few in review or waiting with us. Again, I need to double check the data. I think this is off slightly, but we will find out what's going on here. My apologies to the committee and to the public. We've had the Mountain View Mediation Program has received 54 mediations and conciliations, 21 of which have been resolved, and 33 of which are still pending. And the next section is eviction prevention. And you're going to see some new data and new data references in this section. The first top part of this is specifically looking at the Housing and Eviction Help Center. We've held 6 clinics through the end of September for 42 community members being reached. We have 37 tenants, 3 landlords, and 2 other people who also attended. 45% have required assistance in a language other than English. All of that has been in Spanish. And you can see here the top 3 reasons for attending the HEHC. 1 is rent assistance, 2 is eviction help, and 3 is legal assistance. 52% heard about our services through the community. 48% of households attending the HEHC have 3 or more people living in them. And the majority, 73%, live on an average annual household income of less than $54,000 a year. Now, this is the new section. So in the past, we had data that was self-reported through our intake surveys, and now we have data that is actually coming from the partners that we work with. So we know that through September 30th, 9 households have received rental assistance through CSA for an average assistance award of $5,117. And then Community Legal Services of East Palo Alto has also started providing us with solid data from their end. And 32 of our tenants that attended the HHC received free legal advice through ClassFi. 78% of those that received legal advice had also received a termination notice. And partially unrelated to that number, they should not be looked at in conjunction with each other. 6 households received legal representation that was needed to allow them to stay in their home. So there is a difference there between those numbers. No, the 78% that received legal advice that had also received a termination notice, those tenants were, for the most part, not evicted. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. And I will also go ahead and clarify further with ClassFi about what they're actually seeing in terms of what kind of full legal representation they mean when they say that that's allowing them to stay in their home. Continuing along with the eviction prevention program, required noticing, 18 bank rent increase notices were filed. 321 termination notices were filed with us. There's been 1 tenant buyout notice and 1 additional occupant notice filed so far this year in our systems. And you can see this broken down further, no fault evictions versus at fault evictions. And I do want to clarify when we say notice to cease here, I'm hearing that my audio is not great. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my headphones. Please give me 1 moment.
And my apologies, is this better? Can you hear me?
That's better.
Thank you for the confirmation. So as you can see here, I do want to clarify what notice to cease means. So notice to ceases are notices that property owners have to provide for certain types of at-fault evictions before an at-fault termination notice can be given to the tenant. The tenant has to be allowed to remedy the situation. And we have some data here for failure to pay rent notices over time. You can see the entire fiscal year information since fiscal year 18-19 through this fiscal year. And then we see the breakdown quarterly. So this is a year-long breakdown, and you'll see that we have had a slight uptick this quarter in failure to pay rent termination notices. Of the 312 failure to pay rent termination notices that were received by the city, 225 of those were unique to individual households. So that means that of the 312, 225 of those were non-repeating households. Tenant relocation assistance. You can see here that there are no properties in redevelopment. There have been no properties in redevelopment since 2021. Therefore, there are 0 units affected, and 1 household has received assistance for one of those projects that happened or occurred in the past. As far as property sales data, this is now the past 10 years. So you'll see some of the data has dropped off. There's only been 2 so far this fiscal year for a total of 24 units, well below the average of 155. So just want to reiterate that there is not an increase in property sales, units sold over time, or the number of properties in redevelopment. Currently, there are 2 properties for sale for a total of 11 units on the market. The next section that we'll look at is for mobile homes. And you'll see here a general overview, how many mobile home parks we have for the total number of actual mobile home units. All parks are registered and all space rental fees have been paid by those parks. So far through September 30th, we've received 7 inquiries from the public, 2 for tenant petitions and 2 for registration portal assistance. And you can see here, so far this fiscal year, there have been no mobile home related petitions filed either by homeowners, tenants, or mobile home park owners. And we have received no at-fault evictions and, no fault evictions, excuse me. And we've received a few at-fault evictions, mostly for failure to pay rent. The next section that we'll talk about is our last section, and we'll take a look at average market rent. So right now you can see newly built units are going for about $4,187 a month, and partially covered units are about $3,000, and then down to our fully covered units at $2,637. You'll see that detail broken down by the number of units as well in the bottom graph there. Vacancy rates, we have a similar situation happening here in format. So overview for the whole market and then broken down by, specifically for fully covered units, and then by the number of bedrooms as per the request of the Rental Housing Committee. So right now, for fully covered units, the vacancy rate is 5%, and for all units, it's 6.3%. You see that bump up because of newly built units. And that concludes the presentation for the quarterly report, Q1 of 2023-2024. And we will take questions at this time.
Thank you very much. Committee Member Ma.
So going back to the inquiry topics for the LCSFRA, I see that other is the 4th most, it's the 4th largest category. Do we have any breakdown of what's inside that other, or is it just basically any random question?
I can go ahead and look further into the data to determine what's causing the other. We've tried over the years to really target that particular category and ensure that those other topics are as pulled out as possible. So I will go in and look into the data and report back to you.
Okay. On the sections 3 for the rent adjustment petitions, do we know what the 4 kinds of other petitions were? Were they all joint petitions or were they some other kind? Yeah, this page.
So 2 were compliance petitions and 2 were joint petitions for new additional housing services. So when we say compliance petitions, we are talking specifically about compliance with a decision. So that would account for the 4 there.
Okay, and the last one is on the 2 pages before in the education section. So for the committee updates, is it just updating on what we're doing, or is there a different kind of committee update?
So the committee update is specifically about rental housing committee meetings. Okay. So we send out emails at every before every rental housing committee meeting. And there was a change in how that was reported in the initial document that you received. It said that there was 1, but there was actually 2 to represent the 2 committee meetings that had occurred in the fiscal year thus far.
Okay, those are all my questions.
I have a few questions. So I noticed we had 1 buyout, and have we had buyouts previously?
We have. They're pretty rare, though. They don't happen very often.
And we may not have any way of knowing this except that 1 took place, but just curious, do we know the motivation of this particular buyout?
This staff member is not aware of that. Andrea, do you happen to know?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can definitely look into our notes on that property and see if I have any information about that.
Thank you. In the mobile home parks, there were some at-fault evictions, and were any of those, I'm just curious about, were they, and also do we know, were they renters of the mobile home itself, or were they owners of the mobile home?
So I do want to clarify that these are, and maybe we can put this in the title, these are notices that we've received. So these are not evictions that have gone through the unlawful detainer process.
Okay.
These are just the notices as received by the city. So we have not seen in the courts these go through to be, a full eviction. That doesn't mean that it's, the tenant didn't self-evict. But I do want to make that point of clarification. For this fiscal year, we've only seen 1, and I believe that it was for failure to give access, and we can look into the data in more detail, but I don't believe that tenant actually vacated the property.
I think this is for the apartments, not mobile homes, right?
Excuse me, let me go to mobile homes. Thank you, Committee Member Brown. So here, Chair Keating, we have 5 notice to cease, and that was in fiscal year 2022-23. And for this year, we've received 9 failure to pay rent notices and no other type of notice.
And so we don't know if those were for space rent only or for the whole, there's some for someone renting the mobile home.
I don't have that data right now, but I can see if we can find that out. Although I do want to, again, reiterate that these are notices, not actual unlawful detainer evictions. So likely, just like we see for CSFRA units, these tenants are probably current on their rent or working toward being current on their rent now.
So there are 2 steps before the actual eviction then. I guess I'm confused between failure to pay rent and notice to cease.
So a notice to cease is for at-fault evictions that aren't related to failure to pay rent. for everything, for the other types of categories here for at-fault evictions, a property owner has to provide a notice to cease. And then the tenant has to be allowed the opportunity to rectify the issue before an actual eviction notice, termination notice can be given. For a failure to pay rent, that's a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. So the property owner provides that notice. And then typically what we see is that the tenant either pays the past due rent or is able to work with the property owner to stay in their home, or is able to receive some sort of rental assistance to stay in there.
Thank you. So now I'm getting clear that both the failure to pay rent and the notice to cease are both warning that can be corrected.
Correct.
Thank you. And last question. So we had some situations in this quarter of banked rent being exercised, and that, or I forget your wording on the display, but that the rental housing staff is notified when a banked rent increase is being exercised, is being used.
That's correct. Property owners have to, with the caveat that the property owner is, following their due diligence under the regulations, they are required to file their banked rent increase notice with the city, typically through the portal, or they can come and see us and we can help assist them to get it in the system correctly.
Committee Member Ma? Just to follow up on that, so when a landlord chooses to increase rents less than the AGA, that allows future banking, but there's no report needed of charging rent increases less than the AGA. Just seeking that confirmation.
That's correct. Anytime a banked rent increase is used, the property owner needs to file a banked rent increase with us. And if a property owner gives a rent increase, they are supposed to go into the portal and update the rental rate for the tenant that they increase the rent on, whether or not a banked rent increase was given. It's not that increase, it does not have specific language like a banked rent increase does under our regulations that need to be given. And there's no formal filing of a particular form that needs to be done by that property owner, but they are supposed to go in and update the property in the portal.
When they exercise the banked rent increase?
When they exercise the banked rent increase, or when they give any increase in general, each unit has when a property owner registers with the portal, with our system, each unit is, the information for each unit is broken down and includes the current rent. When a rent increase is given, even when it's the AGA, the property owner is supposed to go into the portal and update that rent. Or they can update it at the start of the new fiscal year, or the new billing cycle, excuse me. When it's a banked increase, the property owner needs to file a form with us to let us know that the banked increase was given and that the tenants were provided the correct language. So banked rent increases mean there's an additional step of filing a form with us.
Thank you.
In the system.
No more questions for now. Committee Member Ma.
Yeah, one question just popped in my mind. For termination notices, most of them are just like an end of a lease, or is there, when would you file a termination notice? And why there's so many so now?
So we're not seeing a lot of we're not seeing any more termination notices than normal. I want to reiterate that. When a lease ends, that is not a reason for eviction. There are 9 just cause reasons for eviction or for eviction noticing. 4 are for no fault evictions, which you see here. So that would be like a landlord driven reason for eviction or for a termination notice. That would be withdrawal from market, owner move-in, temporary vacancy for repairs longer than 30 days, or for the demolition of units.
Oh, wait. Oh, is it just the sum of the failure to pay rent notices plus the at faults? Is that where we get the number, or?
321 termination notices
Yes.
are for all of the termination
Okay,
notices
it's just
we've
some.
received
Okay.
this year.
Okay.
Any other
Any
committee
other
questions?
questions?
Yes, Committee Member Brown.
I would also like to see the breakdown between the types of renter for the mobile homes in a future report.
The
Just
types
one-
of what?
Mobile
I
homes,
can't hear you.
space rent versus renter, like full rent. For the
number
notices,
of-
yeah.
The number of tenants who are,
Mobile home tenants versus homeowners, yeah.
let me see if we can pull that data.
Yeah, thank you.
Committee Member Cox, did you have a question?
I just want to make some comments when the questions are done.
I think we're done with questions, and we should check if we have any public comment on this item. I'm not seeing any in person, and are there any online attendees who would like to raise hand and ask a question?
No public comment.
Okay, so now we're ready for committee feedback.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Yeah, I just wanted to say, first of all, very much thank you to the staff for putting these reports together. They're a highlight of my week when they come out because, I mean, I'm always a person who's interested in the data that shows how things are going in the city because I like to get a pulse on whether things are getting worse or getting better and in which way. And so I just wanted to say that I think that in this report, there are some things to be happy about, and in particular that the number of inquiries is back to pre-COVID levels, which means that we're not in a COVID danger emergency situation anymore. Things are getting a little bit back to normal. Also that it's nice to see that for the mobile home ordinance, that the number of parks registered and space rental fees are at 100%. And that for apartments, they're moving closer to that. So thank you for all the things that we have done, staff and us together, to help improve those numbers. And another thing that was a little bit surprising to me, but was confirmed by an article that I read in the Mercury News today. If you look at the new apartments, there's only been a 2% increase in rents over the 7-year period. And that's a positive thing, even though, they're considerably more than, the average or the rent-controlled units. But it's also tied, I guess, to the idea that we've seen the vacancy rate drop in half in the last 6 months, down to about 12%. So maybe when it gets down to around 5%, we're dealing with, at least according to the Mercury News, we're dealing with, we haven't recovered our population since COVID because a lot of people moved away and an equal number of people haven't moved back. So anyway, and we're kind of up for trying to get a lot of new housing in the housing element, and so getting the vacancy rate down is, something important in order to motivate people to move ahead with projects they might want to do. So that's good. And then let's see what else. And for all units, it says rents are up about 22%. I went through and calculated the CPI. It's just like 2% above that. So it looks like we're keeping things affordable, factoring in inflation. So that's great. So anyway, thanks for the good work, and I'm happy to see some good news.
Other comments? Okay. And so I think we've already registered one comment for future reports to separate there's interest here from at least two of us to, I could even see it being 2 pages for the mobile homes, one for those who are the owners of their homes, and then second page for the space rent. Oh, into the rent? In other words, I might not have been heard? Okay. Patricia, was I heard? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we are done with this item and ready to move on. And our next item is amendment to the Rental Housing Committee meeting schedule for calendar year 2024. So this is kind of a big jolt that it potentially won't be Monday nights anymore, as it has been since 2017, but we can change. Okay, and I believe we have a staff staff presentation, so we'll go there.
Thank you, Chair, Rental Housing Committee members. This agenda item came out of the meeting of the Rental Housing Committee held on October the 21st. And we're hereby proposing to adopt a resolution amending that meeting schedule for the next calendar year. As we all know, is that the Rental Housing Committee has been assigned powers and duties, and one of those is to hold regular meetings. And we just, in September the 25th, the Rental Housing Committee adopted its meeting schedule for next year, but further deliberations on October the 21st kind of showed that an increase in review time of the documents and the agenda would be appreciated, and the Rental Housing Committee would like directed staff to come back with options to moving the Rental Housing Committee to another day of the week. So staff has looked at all the options also for using the council chambers for their meetings, and the only evening available would be the Thursdays in the week, and the staff proposes to schedule the rental housing committees in general on the fourth Thursday of the month, except in November and December, which are proposed to be the second Thursday of the month. And that is because of all kinds of holidays interfering with our work. Then we also discussed to publish the agendas the Friday before the meeting so that the members have time to review the documents and the agenda over the weekend, and then there is time to have questions posed by Rental Housing Committee to staff. So this slide shows what the proposed meeting schedule would look like compared to the previously adopted schedule. Next slide, please. So our previous slide, this is the end of the presentation, and we recommend to adopt a resolution to amend the schedule as shown in the previous slide.
Thank you very much. So are there any committee member questions? I bet we'll have comments in a minute. And are there any members of the public, either in person, which I don't see, or online, which you would need to raise your hand, who would like to comment on this item?
No public comment.
Okay. So now, this is at our retreat on the 21st. We agreed to gift each other with sharing how we're intending to vote, or if we're agreeing with staff recommendation before we vote. So if we could have some comments in that spirit. Committee Member Cox.
I strongly support doing this because, you know, all five of us have regular jobs, and our best time, what I heard in the retreat was that, and I know it's true for me, that, I mean, you know, my best time to read through all this stuff and think through it is on the weekend. And yet I also feel like staff needs the time to be able to, you know, answer the questions that we pose to them. And, you know, some of them require research. So I think, you know, making them have to do it in a partial day or something like that is just too onerous. And I think this is going to be a lot better. So I'm supporting it.
Committee Member Brown.
Agreed.
Committee Member Ma.
Yes, I support the changes because they also make this calendar a lot more uniform in a way, because if you see the previous adopted one, it's kind of shifts between which Mondays. So I like to be simple about which day of the month.
Thank you. I'm also very happy for this proposed change. So I think we're ready for a roll call. We need a motion and a second. Committee Member Brown.
I move that we adopt the new work schedule for calendar year 2024.
Committee Member Cox.
Second?
Roll.
All right, thank you. We'll begin with Committee Member Brown,
Yes.
Committee Member Ma,
Aye.
Committee Member Cox,
Yes.
Chair Keating.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Our next agenda item is an update on the petition program. Oh, what did I'm so sorry.
Work plan.
Oh, the more substantial item. Flip too many pages. We will definitely now move to our work plan agenda item. And public comment will take place after the presentation and after committee questions. And we are ready for our staff presentation.
Thank you very much. Just for FYI, we have used the old dates for 2024 in our draft work plan, but we will adjust those dates accordingly since these are mostly monthly meetings anyways, so we can easily change that. So for today, the purpose is to establish a rental housing committee work plan for 2024 and for the rental housing committee to provide feedback to staff both in terms of content and timeline. So the CSFRA and also the MHRSO charged the rental housing committee with a number of tasks. The more important ones being establishing rules and regulations for the administration of the CSFRA and the MHRSO, for determining the annual general adjustments of rent, approving the annual budgets and fees, and hearing appeals in the petition process, which you have been acquainted with thoroughly in the past few months. So the work plan outlines a list of tasks, overviews, and issues that the Rental Housing Committee may want to bring forward in 2024. The work plan is a blueprint to guide the work of the Rental Housing Committee. And if necessary or desired, that work plan can always be adjusted accordingly. So staff provided a provisionary draft work plan for the Rental Housing Committee to deliberate over and make suggestions. So in general, the following items are found in a work plan. Some agenda items are on an as-needed basis, such as appeal hearings, although it almost sounds like that's becoming a monthly thing. Regulations. For the next year, we propose to add the anti-harassment policy, clarification of master tenant, subtenant lease issues, and evaluation schedule for habitability petitions. There are monthly items on the work plan, such as approving the minutes of the meetings and updates on workshops, clinics, and help center hours. We have quarterly items, such as data reports, expenditures overview. And we have annual items, which in general can be found either in the CSFRA or they provide an annual overview of, for instance, the outreach and education program, the tenant relocation activities, a petition program like you will be receiving later tonight, and an update on the registration and rental housing fees. And of course, the meeting schedule and the work plan itself. So tonight, we request you to review that work plan and provide feedback to staff. And the work plan can be found as an attachment to the memo.
Committee Member Ma.
For the annual items for the registration and rental housing fee update, is that a time where we will bring up questions about what we would need to revisit with the penalties to ensure that the registration number goes up, or do you want that to be agendized as a separate topic? Is that the time where it is germane to bring up ways we can figure out how to get the registration percentage to go higher than it is now for the property registration?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
you can bring that up.
And I didn't quite gather under what work item would that be?
It wouldn't be on our work item. It's just already an annual item we already scheduled on our February meeting. Is an annual update about how registration is going.
And so within that would be the possibility of more sticks or whatever we needed.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Effective enforcement.
Thank you for that more formal phrasing. Okay, so we're on the questions part, and then we'll go to public comment. And so do we have more questions? Committee Member Cox.
Yes. On the anti-harassment policy, I'm trying to remember the background for it. I remember that there were some articles in the newspaper about some issues in other cities. And I remember Committee Member Ma was an enthusiastic supporter of it, but I'd just like a little bit more detail of what it is, you know, where are we now and what can we accomplish by having, you know, a better or just an anti-harassment policy?
Yeah, in short, it would be an anti-harassment policy.
Okay, so we don't have one now.
Correct.
Okay, got it. And are there specific instances in Mountain View that are, you know, that were troublesome that are motivating this now?
It is being brought to the foreground because lately there have been more instances where we heard of types of harassment, and it is a very gray area of what can or cannot be done specifically for the harassment situations.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
I think what I would like to talk about is under comments, so I'm just going to save it. And Committee Member Ma.
Yeah, so related to a question submitted to staff. So the valuation schedule is currently set to be a single meeting where we just go straight to regulation. Is that enough time for that topic, or?
So in general, when staff feels that a regulation is not subject to a lot of discussion or options, we try to keep it as simple as possible. So evaluation schedule would look like a schedule of topics or items that need to either be are discussed under, for instance, a housing service or a maintenance or habitability issue petition. And right now, the hearing officers have to come up with their own reasoning of how much to deduct if they decide that a situation, habitability situation, actually exists. And we would like to see if we could come up with a draft schedule so there are more fixed numbers that can be added to certain habitability issues.
So something like, you know, there's a damage in the kitchen versus damage in a bedroom. We would treat those, would those be in that kind of schedule or be separately?
Correct. Like if the windows are broken, if the doors don't close, if the heating isn't working, if there is no hot or cold water, those types of issues.
Okay.
So this would be similar to the amortization tables that we have for capital improvements?
Yes, except that these are habitability issues. Yeah.
Member Cox.
And do you envision stating these in like dollar amounts or percentages of rent reduction, or how? Or maybe it's too early to ask such a question.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't done the research yet.
Okay.
We do know that other cities do have these valuation schedules, although they give ranges of amounts.
Okay. Yeah, there'll need to be a way to adjust them for inflation.
Yeah.
I think we're getting past questions into comments, and so I'd like to call for any public comment. Not seeing any in the audience. Are there any raised hands?
There are no raised hands.
Okay, so now we are free to comment as well as question. On this same issue of a valuation schedule for habitability, one thing that I hope staff can provide as part of that is some history, and I'm not sure if it needs to go, how far back it needs to go, but at least a few years of what hearing officers have decided. So I'd like to hear, hearing that other jurisdictions have this, but I'd also like a summary or at least some examples of what hearing officers hearing our petitions have decided. And I think, are we all comfortable? The question has come up, would we like a study session followed by a time to adopt regulations? Or, if we get all the information, we could do it all in one night, if staff thinks that's possible. Member Cox?
Yeah, I would like to just see how much there's there, to get a sense of that. But I mean, I just wanted to also comment that I'm enthusiastic about going ahead with this because I really think, having something written out on this is kind of important because, it shows you uniformity and maybe there'll be less questioning, in terms of, appeals and stuff like that, right? I mean, if people feel like they have a chance of being treated more fairly.
So just a minute, I guess I'll just say that the questions I had about the work plan have been addressed by what other committee members have brought up, that we are going to have a opportunity, I think in February, to talk about ways to get our registration numbers higher. And we've just had a discussion about our support for the valuation schedule. So further comments or questions? Committee Member Cox?
Yeah, I mean, I support the other two policy items too. I mean, I think that the clarification on the master tenant subtenant relationships is a good thing. We had an appeal earlier this year with regard to that, and so I mean that made me think that it's a useful thing to have more of that in writing since there are situations like this. And I just wanted to ask I guess this is a question. I didn't see the retreat on there. I think it would be nice to do an annual retreat. Don't want to do another one?
Agreed.
Yeah, we can definitely add that to the work plan.
Okay.
And then we'll figure out a date ahead of time.
Not just because it was a good lunch. It was good brainstorming.
Maybe hang gliding?
That's not an offset. That's not a retreat.
Committee Member Ma.
I'm actually going to ask some for further clarification of what will be the scope of the anti-harassment policy. Would it be about burden of proof? Is it about...
We have to research all that.
Okay. Because I also mentioned in a question to staff about recognized tenant organizations, because it's a term in the CSFRA, but I don't think that's ever been used at all because no one knows what a recognized tenant organization is, and I was wondering if that could be incorporated into that topic.
I would support further research into the possibilities about that. It's fairly quiet. Are we ready for a So we've given you a little bit of input, and do you need a committee member, Ma?
So currently we've set basically, would staff think that these three items alone will be enough to fill out the full like regulations bucket for the year, roughly speaking, for staff time?
And as we said, this is like a blueprint. It's not a formal adoption of a resolution. This is just a guideline for the coming year. And anytime something else or more urgent or pops up, we can always address that and change the topics around.
I see that we just need to give you input, and we don't need to have a motion on this item.
That's correct, and I received all your input.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
I think we're ready to move on, as I was before. Our next item is our annual update on the petition program.
Thank you, Chair Keating, and thank you, committee members. Item 5.5 is, as Chair Keating mentioned, the annual update on the petition program. So the purpose of this agenda item is to provide the Rental Housing Committee with an annual update on the petition program. You will receive information on a summary of the petitions processed through fiscal year 2022-23 and a summary of the related administrative processes. For a little background, the Rent Stabilization Program began accepting petitions in November of 2017, and we held our first hearing in January of 2018. And then in October of 2021, we were also tasked with implementing the MHRSO, including petitions for individual adjustments of rent related to properties covered by that ordinance. A little background. So you receive quarterly updates, previously monthly, now quarterly updates on the petition program and what is happening. This shows the petition program for this current fiscal year. And you also receive in these updates how many petitions have been received over time and how many petitions have been received during the fiscal year. And we also now give updates about the petitions program and less frequently about hearing officers and hearing officer updates. This particular item was agendized at the request and direction of the prior Rental Housing Committee. And this particular report provides an overview of experiences through this fiscal year. The previous report that was included as an attachment 1 to this report, gave an overview that was a 5-year look back. And this one provides more focused information for the current fiscal year that just passed. I wanted to give a brief overview of the purpose of the petition process itself. So tenants or landlords can initiate a request for an individual adjustment of rent. In that request, they explain and document the basis for the rent adjustment. This is to establish fair and transparent procedures. And the petition process also notifies all parties of a pending petition and allows them to participate in the process. Last month, we went over the petition process, how it works in depth for an update of regulations related to how long it takes to go through the petition process. So I am skipping over that this evening. The program has a variety of different petitions for both tenants and landlords to initiate. There are 2 that are specifically initiated by landlords. One is the maintenance of net operating income petition, and the other is the specified capital improvement petition. Tenants can file petitions for 4 reasons. One is unlawful rent. The next one is related to habitability issues or a decrease in services. We also have tenant hardship petitions, and then finally the joint petition. So the joint petition for new or additional housing services must be initiated by the tenant. And then we have 2 other types of petitions. One is decision compliance petitions. Those can be filed by either the tenant or the landlord, and a property exemption petition. And the same goes for that as well. So this gives you an overview of the petitions received by the program through fiscal year 2022-23. You can see that we typically averaged for a few years there, about 16 petitions a year. It kind of evened out. And then this past year, we've had a significant increase in petitions, 181% increase year over year. And then this is the status of those petitions that were filed with the program from the beginning of the program through the end of June of 2023. So this is not current. This is, again, through the end of June 2023. And at that time, we had a few that were in review and going through the hearing process. Of the ones that had completed the process, 66 tenant petitions and 9 landlord petitions were decided by a hearing officer. 27 tenant petitions and 2 landlord MNOI petitions were settled in either our formal pre-hearing settlement conference or slightly outside of the process or conciliated before getting too deeply into the process. And then we had 15 that had been decided on appeal related to tenant petitions and 3 that had been decided on appeal for MNOI landlord petitions. We had very few petitions that have not been accepted by the program. One of them, and these are specifically typically not accepted by the hearing officers, by hearing officer order. One was for a property that had extensive code violations, and a few others were related to tenant petitions, one of which was for an undue hardship petition that was not filed in the given time frame. 11 tenant petitions have been withdrawn by the petitioner and 5 for property owners. So this is landlord initiated petitions a little bit more in depth. You can see we received our highest amount of MNOI petitions way back in 2017-18, and we haven't received any since 2021-2022. For tenant-initiated petition, and I do also want to mention we have received inquiries about specified capital improvement petitions, but we have not had any filed yet to date. For tenant-initiated petitions, again, there are 4 main buckets or types of petitions, and this is a breakdown of those petitions. You see the most number of tenant hardship petitions being filed in fiscal year 2018-19. And those were mostly actually in response to a large property that was looking to file and increase rent through an MNOI petition. And then this past fiscal year, we saw again, large increase in the number of petitions filed, 27 of which were related to unlawful rent petitions, 12 related to habitability concerns, and 6 for tenant hardship. And we'll go over that a little bit more in depth a little further in the presentation. And then finally, we have our other category, which you see here. We had 1 exemption petition filed so far and through fiscal year 2022-23. We do have 2 decision compliance petitions that have been filed in 23-24. And I'm just making a mention of that because there was a question from the RHC regarding that. So specifically for petitions filed in 2022-23, we had 45 petitions filed in that fiscal year. As I mentioned earlier, this is a 181% increase in petition filings compared to the previous fiscal year. All petitions were filed by tenants, 27 for unlawful rent, 12 for failure to maintain a habitable premise, it's 27%, and 6 for tenant hardship, which is 13%. No new or additional housing services were petitions. MNOI petitions, specified capital improvement petitions, or exemption petitions were filed with the city. And I do want to note that there was, as we discussed last month, an increase in the filing of multiple petitions for single units and or petitions with multiple issues for single units. And this is a breakdown of how we, what we received, a visual breakdown. And then these were those statuses of those petitions through the end of the fiscal year. Again, this is not current, so this is through the end of the fiscal year. We had 2 in review, and were being reviewed by staff and had yet to be accepted by the program. We had 20 that were in the hearing process at that time, 3 that had settled, 18 that had been decided by hearing, and 2 that were in the appeal process. The trends in both the increasing numbers of petitions being filed with the city and the petitions filed with multiple issues are anticipated to continue in fiscal year 2023-24. And we will continue, as we always do, to perform program modifications through fiscal year 2023-24 to best assist the community and effectively administer the program. Some of those that are already being executed by staff are releasing a combined petition for unlawful rent, failure to maintain habitable premises, and reduction in housing services or maintenance issues, so that tenants with multiple issues in their unit do not have to file multiple types of petitions with the program. We'll also be assessing staffing levels to ensure that we're able to administer the program effectively and in a timely manner. And we will be determining how best to hire additional hearing officers. And this concludes staff's presentation. Again, this is an informational presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Committee Member Ma.
So on the interest in capital improvement petitions, do you know what the interest was specifically on improving? Was it on like seismic retrofit, on electrification, or for some other reason?
Most of the inquiries were related to balconies and balcony repairs. There's a new state law requiring specific types of balcony maintenance, repair and replacement, and the inquiries were regarding that.
Okay, and this was not covered in this, perhaps it may have been covered on a previous topic. Do we know what kind of legal representation people bring to these hearing meetings? Is it mainly no lawyers, or does one side bring a lawyer usually?
In general, most of the time, neither party is represented by legal counsel. Okay. Sometimes we have property owners that have legal counsel, and there have been instances where some tenants have been represented as well. However, it's still pretty infrequent that we see a lot of legal representation for either party.
Okay, those are all my questions.
Committee Member Cox.
Just wondering, I mean, the lack of any capital improvement petitions, do you have any theories as to why that is? Because, I mean, we put them out there thinking, I guess, that there would be a reason for them, right?
So I think in general, it goes back to what we see with MNOI petitions as well. Property owners are able to recuperate the costs when they have vacancies, and the vacancy decontrol steps in.
Okay. Another question. We talked about there was a categorization of petitions settled through a mutually determined agreement via the pre-hearing settlement conference or conciliation. And I was wondering, that was put next to the MNOI petitions, and I'm just wondering, how can that be? Is that possible, or that's just boilerplate on all petitions?
So any petition is able to go through either the hearing process or the pre-hearing settlement conference process, which is basically like a mediation. In the past, we had two MNOI petitions that were actually settled without going through a hearing process. So in that, those settlements are private, unlike the public disclosure that occurs with the full petition hearing. However, obviously, if the property owner was willing to go through the settlement process, the result was probably something that they were comfortable with receiving.
Okay, I guess I don't understand what it means to settle it privately, because I must be missing something in terms of how this is done, because the idea is that they're not receiving a fair rate of return, and yet they have usually a large number of tenants. So, I mean, privately negotiated, him and who else?
In the process, there's an opportunity for parties to meet together during a conference. Like I said, it's like a mediation between the property owner and the tenant. In this case, these were for smaller, typically when we had these for M&OI petitions, any unit involved in this process, the tenant and the property owner, for example, let's say we had a property with 100 units. Let's say 50 of those units were potentially receiving an increase through this process. Any of those 50 individual units, if the property owner had said, I would like to request this settlement conference so that the tenant and I can come to a mutually agreed upon rent increase without going through the full hearing process, I would like to do that. The tenant of any of these 50 units, any of these 50 tenants can opt in to that mediation. And then there is a mediation between the property owner and the tenant to come up with a mutually agreeable rent increase.
Okay, thank you. That makes that a lot easier to understand. What's a property exemption petition?
So there is if a property owner is in disagreement with the determination, typically that a property is not covered, it is covered by the CSFRA. They are saying that it's not covered by the CSFRA. We, the city, are saying that it is covered by the CSFRA. Or likewise, if a property owner says and the city confirms that it's not covered by the CSFRA, but a tenant states that it is covered by the CSFRA, either party can file an exemption petition with the city disputing that determination. And we've had one in the past 7 years that the program has been running.
Okay, it seems like it wouldn't be something that would be that hard to figure out. I guess maybe if you're on the border of like maybe 1995 or not, maybe that could be it. Let's see, any other questions that I have? Just wondering, in terms of property owners which are served with or become involved in a lot of petition hearings, I mean, is there any effort on the city to say like, hey, you're like about 300% above average, and maybe you should think about why that is?
So staff does our very best to reach out to property owners and help educate them about the law, how they might be able to, be in compliance with the law to reduce the likelihood that petitions are filed in general. And that does seem actually to be pretty effective. There's a lot of properties that we probably would see petitions for related to, for example, unlawful rent related to concessions or related to other base rent issues that have been mitigated because of staff outreach to the property owner. So hopefully we're able to avoid that as much as possible.
Okay, I just kind of wondered whether, like maybe some property owner might not realize this. You might just think, well, this is happening all over the place. And, just a thought. Okay, that's it for my questions. Thank you.
Committee Member Brown? Okay. Hiring additional hearing officers is on the screen here. And the next time we're talking about additional or hearing officers in general, either a year from now in the next annual report on petitions, or if it comes up sooner, I'd be curious for just a few bar charts to inform me better. How many hearing officers we've had since the beginning of the program, how many are current, what's their longevity with the program, how many are recent hires and how many are have been hearing officers since the beginning of the petition process. And I'd also be curious, perhaps especially for the current hearing officers, how many how many assignments they've had. So how busy are they? So thank you.
I think I can give you a little bit of that information. We currently have 6 hearing officers. Of that, the bulk of them have been with the program since it started, so I think about 4 of them. The 2 others are a little bit newer. Two of them were hired within the past year. So we typically have between 4 and 5 hearing officers. Right now we have 1 extra, which is not an extra, it's just a little bit higher than normal because we lucked out last year during one of our recruitments and received 2 applications, which was very exciting because we had some attrition in our hearing officer pool. As for the longevity, like I said, most of them have, I think 3 have been here since the start, and one of the 4 came on a year or 2 into the program. We are always looking for additional hearing officers. It is a very challenging role to fill. And so the recruitment process is something that is kind of always open. However, we will be formally doing an RFQ, a request for qualifications, formal full recruitment in Q3 of 2023-24. Hopefully that helped answer some of those.
Yes, that gives a lot of
to provide
more depth of information than I had. Thank you. Are we complete on this item? We don't need a vote on it? Okay.
Public comment?
Oh,
Comments.
what have I missed?
Public comment.
Oh, okay. We've done this before tonight. Sorry, guys. Thank you for the reminders. Is there any, I see no public comment in the audience. Is there any online public comment?
There's no comments.
Okay. Now, committee members, your comments. Committee Member Cox.
Just one short one. It's encouraging to see that 87% of the tenant petitions received judgments in favor of the petition or through a mutually determined agreement via pre-hearing settlement, conference, or conciliation. It shows their real grievances and the system is working as it should. So keep up the good work. Thank you.
Other comments? No? Yes? I also was remembering back to the very beginning days of the CSFRA and hearing some members of the community say the petition process will be full of frivolous petitions. And it's also satisfying to see the proof that we have not had frivolous petitions. We've had meaningful ones.
I do kind of wish that the capital improvement thing worked faster to improve some of the housing stock, but yeah. We can only set up the conditions. We can't actually force people to exercise them.
I think, I'll just add one other comment about, my assumptions around the capital improvements is for the larger, it's tiered in terms of the percent of your capital improvement that is returned to you. So if you're a large landlord, then 50% of your capital improvement will be reimbursed, and with amortization schedules and so on. But it's much higher percent of capital improvements that will be reimbursed if you're a small landlord. So, but small landlords may be less aware of their options within the CSFRA. Now, are we ready to conclude this item? Okay, thank you. So our next item is committee staff announcements and updates. And we'll start with upcoming workshops in the Housing Eviction Help Center.
Thank you, Chair. All right, so we'll be going over upcoming workshops and Help Center dates. So here we have a look at our virtual office hours that we continue to hold every Tuesday, and we do that virtually from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., where anyone can join online, and we have one-on-one help for anybody with questions about rent stabilization. We also have our workshop schedule through the end of the year and a little bit into next year up on the screen here. So on November 16th at 2 p.m. At our Landlord Help Center, we are having a renter protection laws in Mountain View. So this is going to be focused towards realtors or new owners. This is hybrid, so it will be virtual and also in person at our office at 298 Escuela. And then you'll see we're jumping right into our property owner registration and annual fee workshop series. So that's kicking off on December 14th at 2 p.m. And these are going to be some hybrid and some in person and some only online. So we have a little bit of a mix, but you'll see these here are hybrid. And we're doing that virtually and also at our office at 298 Escuela. And we're continuing that on January 9th at 2 p.m. as well. We do find that, especially for these landlord or property management focused workshops, the afternoons during working hours are better for them. So that's why we do that at 2 p.m. And there are also going to be more registration workshops that continue on after January. All right, so now here we have our Housing Help Center, and this is specifically geared towards landlords. However, we never turn anyone away. And we split up our tenant-focused and landlord-focused Help Center hours just to have very focused time with each group and to make sure we avoid any conflicts between the two. So we have staff hybrid, so we'll be in person and also online. And we can give any information about the CSFRA or the MHRSO or other state laws about tenant-landlord issues. We'll also provide eviction help, so if anybody of landlords has questions about eviction protections or how to file their notices online, we help them with that. And we also still provide a lot of information about those supportive services because a lot of our landlords are interested in providing that information to their tenants, so they can get that information there as well. And those are held on the first and third Thursday. These are at the Escuela House in the community room that we have from 1 to 3 p.m. And then you'll see us similarly, but geared towards our tenants. We're continuing to have our Housing and Eviction Help Center. The big thing to notice here is that usually these are held at the library, but this next one coming up on Thursday and then the first Thursday in December are going to be held at our office in Escuela because they're doing some construction at the library, so we had to temporarily move. So we'll be at our house on 298 Escuela from 6 to 8 p.m. and also online. All right, any questions about our outreach? No? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. So for our next meeting, we're seeing our return of our RUBS regulations and also an appeal coming up. So that will be a full meeting then. Do we have any other questions or comments from the committee? I have one. Anyone else? I'm just curious, a month or so ago, maybe two, there were software updates that were being done to better accommodate the fines in the computer system. And I'm just curious if there's an update on how that's coming.
Yeah, we're working very hard with our third party, who's 3DI, to build our database out. So we're hoping to start staff testing in the next week. They've built out the system to collect the payments through the database portal online. And in this build out of the system, it will automatically calculate late fees for non-payment and then late fees for non-registration, and it will build those in on a monthly basis. And the system will automatically do all that for us. And this way, landlords can log right in, register, they'll see their bill right on their homepage, and they'll be able to pay all in the same spot. So we're very excited to see what that looks like, and we're hoping to see that this week.
And this is the first time that the rental housing system is going to be accepting payments, is that correct?
Correct, yeah, we were using finance previously. So we'll be collecting that now on our own through our database.
Okay, we're excited for that feature.
We are.
Okay. Community member Ma.
Will staff be tabling at the Christmas tree lighting?
Yes.
Okay.
No Dutch Santa Claus though this year.
Are we ready to move on to adjournment? Okay. What time is it? 8:36. Okay. This rental housing committee meeting is adjourned at 8:36. The next rental housing committee meeting is scheduled for Monday, except that will still be Monday, December 18th. That will not change. Okay. This year at 7 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Wow. I can go home and party.